Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this week's edition of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're streaming out live on the Alternate Current Radio Network, on the audio streams, going out on Spreaker and the other sort of podcasting live audio streams. We're also broadcasting video live on X, YouTube, Facebook Live, Rumble, and a couple of other platforms. Great to have you guys with us. We're going to bring in a couple of special guests this week, and also it's great to be back. This is the first time I've hosted the Sunday Wire in a couple of months now. So I've been away, and we talked about that on previous shows, but really appreciate you guys for joining us, hanging with us. Hello to everybody in the 21 Wire chat room. See people already piling in there. Hopefully we'll be able to do some interaction with you during the show. Really appreciate you guys joining us anyway. This is going to be a live broadcast. We're going to go for a couple of hours. We got some big things we need to cover, and we're going to need some help doing that. I want to bring up onto the stage first Freddie Ponton, our sort of partner in crime right now. Freddie, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm very good, Patrick. It's good to be with you on Sunday Wire. It's good. It's a good appointment. It's a good meeting for us, and to catch up with the news. They keep on coming. Some of them are exciting, others are less exciting. But overall, I think that there's some good news this week we can take away.
So, Freddie, what are you looking at this week? What are some of the big sort of stories that you'd like to discuss today? Obviously, we're going to bring Hesher and Simon from Florida up onto the stage as well. But what are the most impactful stories you're hoping to unpack this week, Freddie?
Well, I'm busy looking into the 16th BRICS summit in Kazan in Russia. I think it was a major event. There's no doubt about it. What's interesting is the level of conversations, the discussions that took place during this very, very historical meeting. I would say probably a milestone for the BRICS, a milestone for the Global South. And then, of course, trying to really understand also the various, the verbiage, the language used by the United Nations and Antonio Guterres, during his speech during the BRICS summit. So a lot of things that are very interesting that need to be analyzed. And then, of course, on the back of that, around the corner, we have the Georgian election with a Georgia Dream, party who've been re-elected, securing 89 seats in the parliament. So that's also an interesting geopolitical news in a way, because it will affect on how NATO and other countries will deal with the region. So that's also something worth looking into it. And then, of course, we can't keep our eyes from Gaza and Lebanon, which is still a major issues with this late Israeli attack on the Iranian sovereignty. So again, this is something we need to be very careful, understanding exactly what it means, what is the bigger pictures. A lot of disinformation we saw on Twitter recently about what really Iran was prepared to do. So all that needs to be analyzed carefully. And then, of course, the U.S. election is looming. So I guess for the guys in the United States, there's a lot of kind of focus on what is going to happen in the next few days, and how that's going to affect their life directly, how that's going to affect the foreign policy is probably behind that. And that will be interesting to see exactly where this is all going.
Yeah, I think the disinformation and fake news, unfortunately, it's like a daily occurrence. It's hourly occurrence. Or minute by minute occurrence on X. There's so much information that's being pumped through our feeds. We flagged up, one particular fake news story yesterday, and had a lively discussion on Twitter Spaces last night, really talking about this just as a general kind of epidemic, unfortunately. And so that's going to be a bit of a problem going forward. Anyway, we can discuss that a little bit here. Let me bring onto the stage our friend Hesher, Bryan McClain, host of the Boiler Room on ACR. How you doing, Hesher?
I'm hanging in there, man. How you guys doing? It's great to see you this fine Sunday.
It's great to see you as well. I see you've got your stack of newspapers behind you, busy going through the legacy media. Haven't we got anything better to do with our time? Honestly, guys, You getting ready for the big week coming up, Hesher? You getting ready for get your riot gear? You got your hockey helmets ready, extra rounds, some mattresses for the doors and windows?
Yeah, definitely. Time to buttress the doors. Hilarity is certain to ensue. It's certainly getting strange. I've kind of tried to insulate myself from a lot of the U.S. power politics over the last week or so, but I've mentioned it before. Even when trying to insulate oneself, it's still just pervasive. So I haven't even watched Donald Trump on Joe Rogan's show yet. I haven't felt like breaking off that 2.5 hours, but I'm sure there's some gems in there that would be very interesting. It's amazing to me that I'm at this point now. Like, could we just get this over with? Like, if you would have told me 2 years ago, Donald Trump would be sitting there with Joe Rogan about to go up against Kamala Harris, I would have thought, oh, I'll be watching that live. I don't want to miss that. And now I'm just like, I'm more interested in what's going on in the Middle East. I have, I just want to see this over with and see what happens, because the rhetoric is just, it's off the charts. They're basically telling everybody on one side, hey, the country's going to be over if this doesn't happen. And on the other side, they're telling them, hey, democracy is going to be over if this doesn't happen. And it's just all this hyperbole and, no nuance, nothing of substance. It's been very interesting to watch this year's election cycle, but I am ready for it to end whichever way it's going to end.
Yeah, you're talking about substance and nuance. I think you're living in fantasy land there.
Yeah.
Sure. Substance and nuance don't really come into the conversation in U.S. politics anymore. It's totally polarized. Everybody believes on both sides it's good versus evil, and I won't argue with them on a lot of levels. It is. I have my preferences, obviously, and certain issues I feel very strongly about. Certain change that needs to happen. But on the other hand, let's just say I've got reservations about both candidates, very strong reservations about both candidates, more strong reservations about Kamala Harris domestically, big problem domestically, and internationally. I've got serious reservations about Trump. So we can talk more about that later. It's an interesting conversation. The Democrats are more hawkish against Russia, the Republicans more hawkish against Iran. So pick your poison, really, when it comes to World War III. Let's bring on to the stage another guest. We're going to bring on Simon from Florida. Simon says, what does Simon say? Welcome to the program.
Thank you ever so much for inviting me, Patrick, and it's a pleasure to be with you on your return show. Similarly to Freddie, I have been paying a great deal of attention to the BRICS summit, and I can actually prove that I've read all 12,000 words of the declaration, because I actually narrated it and posted it this morning. So I hopefully will be able to fill in some details there if anybody has any questions on that. Obviously, in America, watching with some degree of trepidation the forthcoming election, like Hesher, and keeping a close eye on West Asia as well.
Yeah. We'll talk about BRICS in a moment, guys. And I just wanted to give you a quick update on the U.S. elections. Probably going to be big topic conversation next week too, November 3rd or whenever, just a few days before the election. If we're looking at the polling averages right across the board, looking at really clear politics here, polling averages right across the board, all polls, both candidates neck and neck. It's almost an even split at 48.5%. So a lot of Trump supporters believe that he's going to win by a landslide. So there's a lot of talk about that within Trump support camps. I don't hear a lot from Democrats, period. But then again, guys, we were conscious and paying attention in the run-up to the 2020 election, very much so. And you didn't hear a whole lot from Democrats other than Trump is evil, orange man bad. Biden wasn't campaigning. And then all of a sudden, the votes get slow walked, and like 2 or 3 weeks later, we learn that Biden won by a record margin, the most votes in the history of the universe. And I found that to be completely, I don't know, I was just bamboozled by that, seeing him not campaign, wearing masks around, hardly visible. How could he have broken all records for votes? So all I'm saying, guys, all bets are off. I take nothing for granted. Hesher, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a total toss up. I told Basil, months ago that I wanted to go big if I was going to bet this year, and my bet was going to be no election at all. We're just not going to have it. We're going to just have some sort of black swan event happen, and martial law will be declared. I think the Democrat Party would maybe love that, but then on the other hand, I also think that Trump might be the plan. Like they may just, allow that red wave to happen, because I think, if the vote wasn't skewed, in any of the many ways in which we were concerned about votes being skewed, then yeah, maybe Trump will get in. But if that happens, what happens next? Because financial crash, World War III. I mean, any of these sort of things that would be demoralizing to the whole world and to America in particular would be great to hang around Trump's neck, for those that control the narrative of the United States and our, contemporary times and what will be written as history. So, I mean, if you want to have something really bad happen, if you want to have a great reset, if you want to destroy whatever's left of our Constitution, they would love to hang that around Trump's neck. I'm sure they'd rather have that hanging around Trump's neck than the first woman president of the United States. So, really all bets are off.
Not just the first woman president, the first woman president of color as well. So there's a bonus on top of that. But here's the big question: which candidate is better for Israel? Which candidate would the Israeli lobby prefer? Hesher, off the top of your head, who would you give the nod to? Biden has given Israel every single bomb, every Moab, every bullet, everything they could possibly want. They've had like 10 consecutive Christmases in a row over the last year. And I don't know what the total is in terms of aid, but what they've received in the last 12 months is the equivalent to 15 years of aid. Military aid that they received previously. Who's better for Israel, Hesher?
Well, that's a tough one because, they win either way. Israel's, stoked on either one, I would think. So that might be a bit of a nuanced thing that depends on what the long-term plan is. If we knew what the long-term plan was, it would be easier to answer that question. But it looks like it's escalation of conflict. And let's not forget, Trump's got Kushner and his family there. He's got that whole circle. There's a lot of sort of more corporate gains to be made, perhaps.
Talking about property in Gaza, developing real estate in Gaza. Freddie, is there Damak property potential in Gaza or something like that? Who do you give the nod to for who's the Israeli lobby want, Freddie?
Well, I think there is Israeli money on both sides of the fence, so I think really what's going to make the difference is the administration that is prepared to go to the extra length and actually commit to a war against Iran. So from what we've seen so far, it seems that the Biden administration is slightly reluctant. I think they were brought down to some real hard reality about taking on Iran and what it means, on the global scale, because attacking Iran means attacking Iran's allies, and they have quite a few, not only in the region, but around the world. So that's have to be taken into consideration. As far as what Donald Trump is prepared to do, I think he's made a couple of comments about, going after Iran wouldn't be a bad idea after all. So if I had to put my money on on one of these two, I would say I would go for Trump. And that's what we are seeing at the moment. He's been pushed. I think there is an architecture there within the U.S. politics that indicates that Trump is brought in as a bit of a hero, the savior, but I'm not sure what he's going to save. I think he's going to save himself, but would he save America from itself? Because that's what it needs to do. America needs to save itself from itself because it's in real trouble. And I think the BRICS, as outlined, is so. My bet is on, to answer your question, is on Donald Trump.
I've seen some of the European pundits are starting to panic about if Trump wins, somehow this is going to be like a dark day for NATO. Europe's not going to have any collective defense. You've seen some of the panic stations going on there. It's kind of like, I don't know if that's realistic, because if there's any threats being faced that Europe is facing, it's because of NATO, not because NATO won't get enough support, in terms of Ukraine's a good example. So, yeah.
Well, there is a fear about this. You see, you saw some of the interviews by the French foreign ministers and also in the Netherlands and in Germany that NATO is considered, and especially from France. France is looking at NATO as a potential withdrawal, momentarily, of NATO. It seems that NATO has lost interest in Ukraine. They're not making this news public, really, but France has the feeling that right now the national security, the European security, should be really something that Europe and France and Germany should be taking care of, and not relying every 4 years on whoever president is elected, to decide whether Europe is going to be safe or not. Now, of course, all that is all game. In the same conversation, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot, saying that basically we have to keep on supporting Ukraine, so we need to borrow more money, upgrade our manufacturing capabilities and so on. So you support a US-UK-led project in Ukraine against Russia, but on the other hand, you're fearing that the United States is going to abandon you, because they have bigger domestic issues, and perhaps Israel is probably become more a priority than Ukraine. So all that is rather confusing, but I think these are the same people just using different words to express the same thing.
Interesting. That's what we can build that out a little bit when we start talking about BRICS. We're going to do a post-BRICS analysis. And this is also kind of a great warm-up for us, because we're going to be doing a big BRICS space on X. That's going to be on Tuesday. It's going to be probably about 8 p.m. UK time on Tuesday. So it'll be in 2 days' time. We're going to bring on people who are at the conference, some people who are on the panels as well at Kazan. They're going to join us on that space. So obviously, Hesher, Freddie, Simon, you guys are invited to join us on X for that talk on Tuesday as well. That's going to be interesting. We're going to get Arnaud Devalet as well. He was there covering the conference as well, and also reporting with RT and so forth. So it's going to be interesting. Simon, what do you think about the U.S. elections? Are you based in Florida?
Yes, I am. And I would respectfully disagree. I think that it's very, very clear indeed that the current Israeli administration are all in on Trump. He is the self-proclaimed king of Israel. And we have Trump Heights, his ambassador to Israel that he appointed, has written a book calling for a one-state solution. Trump, in his interview with Israel Hayom, said that he was going to give that man an opportunity to pitch to him the American recognition of the annexation of the West Bank. He's going to help implement the decision plan of Smotrich, the current Israeli finance minister. And I think there's not one shadow of doubt about that whatsoever. You saw in February of 2020, when the current Speaker of the House of Representatives went on a guided tour with the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations of, as he put it, Judea and Samaria, when he was the sidekick to Jim Jordan. And Jim Jordan failed in his attempt to become speaker, and they've put up Johnson instead. He's funneling them unlimited money. And that brings us to the issue of what's going to happen in the lame duck session. Are they going to give Israel another $50 billion? I think there's a distinct possibility of that. They're trying to Trump-proof the arrival of the new administration from the Republicans walking away from the Ukraine situation. Biden's already maxed out everything that he could possibly give them. We're seeing $400-500 million announcements weekly now because they're trying to stuff all of that money out before the new inauguration. And we don't even have a debt ceiling. The debt ceiling got suspended until January. And like France, the United States currently has no budget for 2025. So there's a huge amount going on. It looks like France is going to use Article 49.3, which is essentially a diktat, a presidential declaration, to jam through the budget. They were talking about using Article 47, but they're a minority government and they're looking at 60 billion euros of tax hikes and 40 billion of cuts. There's no way whatsoever they're increasing any defense spending whatsoever. The UK is not increasing defense spending. Pistorius looks like he's going to challenge Scholz for the leadership of Germany. And he, like the Poles, is talking about increasing defense spending in Germany to 3.5% of GDP, which would be a doubling of their current defense expenditure. But the buyout for Krupp Thyssen has fallen through, and there's just not enough cash. Meanwhile, all the four-star generals of these respective countries, their equivalent of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or the Chief of the Defence Staff in Britain, they're all going around saying that we need a whole of society response and we need to be prepared for conscription.
Yeah, just they're totally delusional. The bankers are going to lend more money for the deficit spending. That's kind of where things are headed, isn't it? Why doesn't Germany just invest in big metal recycling plants? Because that's where the Leopard tanks are going to end up anyway after they go to Ukraine. And in terms of the U.S., I think they'd save a lot more money if they would just relocate Zelensky's office from Kiev to Cartagena. That would save in travel, bureaucracy, logistics, so Zelensky could be very near the supply that he needs in Colombia. So that's just my, that was a joke. Hold on, we got that? There we go. What do you think about this, Hesher? Plenty of money for Ukraine?
Yeah, absolutely. And building off what Simon said there also, Basil's reminding me in the background that Trump has the support of the ultra-Zionists, like, for example, the $100 million from Miriam Adelson. And there's, on the other side of that, you've got the other elements of the Israeli lobby there, the ones that are hip for pro-censorship, pro-open borders, pro-transgender, that whole side might be a little bit more anti-Trump, but, where the money all lies definitely seems in that ultra-Zionist category. And I don't know what's going on with Ukraine. Like, is that going to fall apart? Like, what do you guys think? Is that going to fall apart? And so that, if Trump is elected, they can focus on this whole topic, or are they going to just keep running both these conflicts?
I'll tell you my take, and I'll ask Freddie and Simon. But it seems to me it's a consensus within the Republicans that they're going very cold on Ukraine, despite the flag waving and all the rest of it. But you guys, Simon, as well, lame duck session. They're going to ram through as much money as you could possibly stuff into that, whatever window they have, to make sure that the defense industry have all their earmarks in before the new administration, then we can start over and run up another $1 trillion in the first 6 months of 2025. So good business all the way around. They're going cold. The Democrats still have their legacy sunk into Ukraine because all the bodies are buried in Kiev. And that's the Obama administration, that's Biden, that's Amos Hochstein, all of the sort of operatives that were all thick and fast into every single little money-making scheme you can imagine in Ukraine during Obama, and even during the Trump administration, there was some of that stuff going on the first couple of years. So the Democrats have to keep that conflict going to basically prevent their party from collapsing because of scandals, lawsuits, other stuff that starts bubbling up through Hunter Biden's electronic devices and everything else. So their future is invested in Ukraine. They need the war. They need to keep it going. They need Russia as the enemy. Russia needs to be the big bad specter. The Republicans, on the other hand, focusing on Iran. This is where Bibi has told them to look. So this is where they look. This is where they're paid to look. It's all about Iran. So I think Simon's spot on there in terms of the money flows during the lame duck session between November and January. Freddie, what are your thoughts on, are we going to see any serious kind of effort to tie this thing up into a frozen conflict or begin negotiations after the election?
But I think it's important to understand that this is not up to France or any of the European member states per se. It's really up to the European Union at this stage, the European Parliament, European Commissions. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen is back on the train for another few years. So it is a sad reality, but we don't get to really vote on whether we go to Ukraine or not. Those are decisions that are made with the EU and NATO. And France being a NATO member state, and NATO has been very much aligned as far as security is concerned with the EU. It's whatever NATO is going to say from a security point of view, especially with this new Secretary General, Mark Rutte from Netherlands. I think we can only kind of be confident that there's going to be more escalation as far as antagonizing Russia and trying to keep this war open. But internally within the countries, I think there's more and more pressures, and politically it's going to be extremely sensitive, in many countries over Europe to keep on asking for more money to support Ukraine. It's a dead bid. I mean, it's, at this moment in time, it's just a matter of, how many Ukrainian soldiers are going to be left to do the fight or to do the dying, either way. So I think people are very much awake in Europe of that particular status of the war, but it's not really about us. It's about what the EU and NATO wants to do and where the priorities are going to be. But we can be sure that they're going to try to keep it alive as long as they can. After the election, I think we'll have more clarity of what all that means and what Ukraine truly means. Depending on who's going to be elected, we're going to see the next move and who is really behind all this and how important it is to those that have financed this war over the last 2.5 years. So that's a lot of unanswered questions, but I think the answers are coming.
There's been 3 big slaps in the last couple of weeks for the West. One big slap is Kazan, the BRICS summit. That's a big slap to the West. And then the Georgia elections, which you mentioned earlier, Freddie. George Soros and the CIA, Western intelligence, they plowed a lot of money and resources into flipping that election, and they failed. That's devastating. And then Moldova as well. So it's the whole package in terms of NATO expansion, EU expansion. They've hit a real speed bump there, and everybody who's so intent on moving so quickly in this lockstep fashion between NATO and the EU, and things don't look like they're going to plan. I will say they're not going to give up, Freddie. They're not. These people never give up. They just keep going with the agenda, but they have hit a couple of major speed bumps there, and what the hype around Kazan. The public relations value of Putin shaking hands with all of those leaders after they've been saying he's isolated, that alone was worth the price of Kazan. What do you think, Freddie?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's, the rhetoric and the narrative is not going to change. But as I say, there is the U.S. politics, the European politics, the Western narrative about what this conflict is all about. And they're never going to admit the truth. They're never going to admit about a coup in 2014. They're never going to admit about Nord Stream. They're never going to admit about anything. Right? So that's the policy. Don't admit. Keep on lying. The problem is they're facing is the reality on the ground, and the reality on the ground is very far off of what they have to offer. So Kazan is a reminder of that. It's a reminder that Russia is not isolated. It is a reminder that when 30 countries, even if you have 10 kind of full-fledged members and then another 26, but when you put them together, they represent a pretty large amount of the output in the world as far as the economy is concerned. And then, of course, the demographics plays an important role as well. You got almost half of the world literally in Kazan. That's just simply something you cannot ignore if you are the United States or the European Union. So, as I say, it's an accumulation of things and events and geopolitics move on the chessboard that makes it very interesting, but also one wrong move could escalate this to a full-fledged war, and that's the problem, is that how far these people are ready to take it in order to guarantee and to keep this U.S. hegemon and slash the EU. I don't know if the EU has any ambitions anymore. I haven't seen it for a very long time, but it is quite clear that Russia is the bad guys and they want it to go, and then Russia has different plan. It's not trying to entertain any of that. Russia is just maintaining the course of its plan, which is, to get the Donbass, secure the Donbass, go to the river, and then that's it. Whatever's left is going to be Ukraine. And if US is not prepared and Ukraine is not prepared to accept that, then they're going to escalate it with more attack into the country. We also the debacle with the cursed incursions, mainly led by MI6. So, yes, the British government is going to have at some stage to explain to us what were they doing there, because there's enough evidence to prove that they were pretty much behind this. So, yeah, I think Russia is compiling some of that evidence. Some of the journalists, investigative journalists, have some of it. So, yeah, it's not looking great at the moment. And I don't think this US election is going to change anything per se. It's just simply too big to rely on the US elections to kind of reshuffle the entire geopolitics of the world. I think there's a continuity that goes, from EU and US deep states, and where that kind of blurry light between the Democrats and the Republican is not obvious. So it really doesn't matter who's going to be president, to be honest. I mean, I'm of the people that don't believe in really the world being shaped by presidents. I just simply don't believe that.
Simon, what do you think about the Ukraine situation? How much is the result of the U.S. election? How much of that comes to bear on whether this Ukraine project wraps up, or if it just carries on? What do you think?
I think it's absolutely critical. I think it's going to be the single determining factor. It's clear that Trump and Vance don't want anything more to do with the Ukraine adventure at all. I don't believe in Trump's prognostications that he's going to resolve it in 24 hours. I think that was ludicrously bombastic statement. But I think that the clear fact that the whole of NATO has been trying to Trump-proof the outcome of this election is categorical proof that they know that the situation is critical in terms of the US election. And so they've been trying to front load the spending, but also front load the policy commitments. So if you look at the choice of Rutte, that is significant, albeit that he's just a Secretary General. He's essentially a non-executive chairman. I fully understand his functionality. But when you consider the money flows, for example, the US finally agreeing to guarantee $20 billion of the $50 billion loan to Ukraine based upon income from Russian assets that are mainly frozen in the European Union. Very, very little of that income actually is generated in assets frozen in the United States. So that basically put the US taxpayers on the hook for another $20 billion. And that just got agreed last week. I mean, the other two elections, and I agree with you, Moldova is significant. We've got the runoff for president on the 3rd of November next weekend. There are a lot of discrepancies in the Georgian elections. Georgia Dream is claiming that in some of the constituencies, they got 89% of the vote, which seems unlikely. They were in the very rural areas where there weren't many international observers. But on the flip side, you've now got reports of Alexei Goncharenko being spotted in Tbilisi, and he was the guy who organized the trade union massacre in Odessa, where over 50 people were burnt to death. So that would fill me full of some apprehension if I was in a government building at this point. But it's worth noting what happened with the North Koreans and the South Korean response, and noting, of course, that whilst the South Korean president has control of foreign policy, like President Macron of France, his party got trounced in the South Korean elections, and his position is frankly quite vulnerable. And as we're talking, we're seeing the election results come out for the Japanese lower house, and it seems that the LDP and their coalition partners, the Comité, have lost over 50 seats, and they're going to fail to reach the 233 necessary to form the next government. But then, you know, the constant question of these countries that have a large number of parliamentary parties is it's going to take about 10 parties to form a coalition to actually control the lower house. And as we've seen with France, sometimes if they can't get together, you end up with a technocratic government, and they continue the policy even though over half the country's voted against it.
Freddie, is this the case in France? I mean, you have this entrenched power structure that seems to have gamed the parliamentary system, whether it's in France, whether it's in Germany. We see the same thing. We have these sort of globalist technocrats in charge, even though there's massive populist upswells everywhere that are demanding change, but no change is coming. What do you think?
Well, France is a public-private partnership. You know, it's a PPP. That's all it is. You know, this is big players working alongside technocrats and having them doing their bidding. I mean, there's nothing much in that. I mean, if we are to say that Macron controlled the foreign policies, which Simon is partly right about that, it's a bit of become a kingdom, you know, with a king basically having a government. This is not the president's of France's role to get involved in foreign policies. He's not involved in the life of the government. That is the prime minister's role. Yet we see him everywhere. And we've had an inside source in France telling us that they've lost control of the administration. So this is really as bad as it gets, because there is a gap that is widening, you know, and this chaos, you know, after Macron decided to dissolve the assembly has broadened that gap, if you will. The chaos works for very few, but it always works. It's like war. It doesn't work for everyone, but it does work for few, which can predict it, who engineer it, and then and capitalize on that. So that's what we are seeing at the moment. Yeah, it's a terrible situation. But when you, on top of that, if you add the economics and the lack of growth, and the inflation that is just skyrocketed in France, you know, for reasons that are just simply not justifiable. You know, if you know that, you know, our import from the Russian Ukraine, whether it's wheat or fuel, it's 4%. Our gas mix in France is 10%. So how can we expect this huge price in energy and inflation? You know, we're very self-sufficient in food and so on. So all that is engineered. This is not just a coincidence. This is not the Ukrainian-Russian war that is creating this kind of a reaction to markets, you know. So again, we are told many stories, but economists that look into it, and we see some good reports coming out, are clearly starting to defy this notion that a Ukraine-Russian conflict is the source of all problem, including our European security. You know, it just seems very, very manufactured. You know?
Yeah, it's become a problem. I think that it's almost in every government, especially in the G7 zone and in Europe as well, in the West. And meanwhile, there's something completely different going on in a lot of African countries, and also some interesting things going on in Eurasia. Of course, we'll talk about one of those, which is the emergence of the BRICS. I'm going to call it the BRICS network, because when I try to describe to people what is BRICS, just quite simply think of the G7 for the global South, or the G7 for the East and the global South. And it's a network of countries, but this is an interesting network because it's attempting to do a reset. I'll go to Simon in a moment, because I know he's read the BRICS declaration from cover to cover, and I want to talk to him about that, as well as with Freddie, to get his take on BRICS, and maybe Hesher too when he rejoins us. But it's interesting because one of the big takeaways is it is a talking shop, BRICS. It is a talking shop, but it's a talking shop with a purpose. And while the G7 talking shop is about how to increase the consolidation of wealth and power, which is what the G7 are interested in, China might not be on the same page as those other G7 countries, but in terms of the trilateral agenda, that seems to me what the G7 is doing. And as the world becomes more polarized, and the West basically withdraws from the post-World War II U.S.-led liberal international or internationalist order, to use international relations terminology there. Those are all those institutions from the UN, the WTO, everything right across the board. That whole system that was built, all those treaties, all those agreements, all the multilateralism, the West has eschewed that in the last 20 years in favor of something called the rules-based international order. When they say that, when you hear that, that's basically a replacement for international law and all of these things that were built after World War II. That's because the power is becoming more concentrated, more consolidated. The wealth is becoming more consolidated. So things like international law are getting in the way of that hegemony. And that's why they are always putting this out as their sort of new market stall from the United States and its main allies. Okay. So what's interesting about BRICS is the language out of BRICS is multilateralism. The language out of BRICS is we need to have a framework. We're in agreement according to international law. We need to have multilateral missile treaties, non-proliferation treaties, things that are going to increase security and prosperity for everybody. This is the same type of language we heard after World War II. So Russia and China and the BRICS partners are attempting a great reset. They're attempting a great reset of the multilateral liberal world order that got off the ground after World War II, but quickly was subsumed by the hegemonic Western powers. So I'm going to go to Simon on this and see, first of all, do you agree with any of my first glance analysis, Simon? And what do you think are the important takeaways for BRICS?
I think the biggest stumbling block for BRICS at the moment is that they don't yet have a charter or a constitution. There's no governing set of rules like the UN Charter or the US Constitution. That's a huge stumbling block. So they are operating entirely based upon consensus. And that's not always easy to achieve. And it often ends up, as we see with the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, when they're dealing with the situation in Palestine, that it ends up becoming the lowest common denominator in order not to suffer a public veto. And so, when you've got 9 or 10 countries, depending on whether or not you include Saudi Arabia, since there's an issue about whether or not they've actually submitted their ratification documents, you've now got these 13 partner members. So in terms of what they're now calling BRICS Plus, it is very, very clear from the actual document. And I'm not just saying I've read it, I actually have read it out loud as a podcast that took 2.5 hours for 12,030 words. It is very apparent within that document that whilst they declare their desire to operate within the UN structure, they have effectively established a parallel organization. And when you look at the number of paragraphs that refer to the foundation of alliances, forums, think tanks, networks, on almost every aspect of international society that you can think of, museums, theaters, AI, cultural exchanges, university scholarships, military training. It's like a vast competitiveness, corruption, drugs, a huge panoply that people often don't realize exist within the United Nations systems, because all we generally tend to think about, many people, is the Security Council and its ineffectiveness because of people rendering vetoes and long speeches for days and days in the General Assembly. But there are moves for the Pact of the Future and the proposals to reform the Security Council to change that. But the global South is effectively fed up of waiting. Now, BRICS is not new. It's been around for 20 years. It started off as 3, then 4, then 5, then doubled to 10. Now we've got all these partner organizations, a few odd choices of the partners and a few distinctly odd omissions, such as Cambodia and Laos not becoming partners, in order that it would automatically have 6 out of 10 of the ASEAN nations. But it's part of the parallel track that is going on, which is one, China's global civilizational initiative, which in itself is a 25,000 word policy document that I made a documentary on. And then Putin's stated end goal that he's put Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, in charge of implementing, which is the Greater Eurasian Partnership. And that those 3 words are barely known in the Western media. You've got some people like Glenn Deason who have talked about that. And I believe the Quincy Institute once did a 1-hour webinar about the Greater Eurasian Partnership. But that was officially accepted as being the partner program to the Belt and Road Initiative in 2017, in May 2017. And, this is the grand scheme that Xi and Putin have been working on. The biggest stumbling block to the achievement of that was India, and particularly India's participation in the Quad and its dispute with China. But frankly, I think the biggest news of BRICS was the meeting that happened the day before and the meeting that happened on the second day of BRICS on Wednesday, which was that between Modi and Xi, when they confirmed that they formed a mechanism for resolving the border disputes, which India had held out for 5 years as being an absolute must before developing their economic relations with China. Now that issue has been removed as a stumbling block, you see in the joint statement from both of those leaders, they alone represent almost 3 billion people. So when you talk about half of the world being represented, you're absolutely accurate in that regard in terms of BRICS. But 3/4 of the half is India and China. And they've been fighting over patches of ground in the Himalayan mountains. If they can stop doing that, then as a juggernaut, it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And part of their argument will be, as much the same way that we see in the US elections, do you win the electoral college or do you win the popular vote? They're going to say, we represent the popular vote of the planet.
Yeah, well, at least that large economies like China, Russia, like India can come together and basically leverage what they have in terms of resources, manufacturing, know-how, and they're really voting through economics And if the consolidation of natural resources, of which Russia is one of the biggest holders right across the board, minerals, agriculture, wheat, oil, gas, diamonds, all sorts of things. And China being the economic powerhouse that it is, arguably will be the global leader in AI as well within the next few years. And India as well in terms of human capital, in terms of all the different things that it brings to the table. And a few other countries joined in there. That's in terms of economic activity, that just increases a trend that has been going for a long time. Anybody who's been to Singapore in the last 15 years and seen, as an example of a megatropolis, a major hub of finance and commerce, and how that dwarfs anything you would see in the Western Hemisphere in terms of an advanced modern city and just the amount of money passing through some of these places. Freddie, we talk about Dubai and the Emirates and what an east-west hub that is, and the amount of finance and capital there. Then you have Singapore. Then you have these cities in China that are in some of them. You take the top 3 cities in China. That's it sort of rivals the populations of some major countries in the world already. So I don't think people in the West fully appreciate the scale of the power that Eurasia brings to the global economy, increasingly so. And so BRICS is just kind of setting up the stage for a lot more cooperation. And it seems like, Freddie, they're opening the door to, they're planning amongst themselves parallel payment systems and things like that. That's important. But then at some point, they're going to open the market to the West. And they're going to say, if you want to come in the kind of way the European Union has done, Freddie, where they've created what's the biggest market, they say, in the world in terms of GDP, and then they open the door to Europe. But you have to kind of opt into some basic principles in order to, get access to the European market. That's been the EU's big success recipe for so many years. Maybe not as much now with the way the economy is going, but what do you think about BRICS in terms of what they're constructing here? Are they going to be able to suck in attract Western economies at some point?
Well, I think the aim of the BRICS is not to create more enemies. I don't think it is to go against the United Nations or to go really against, some economic policies that would affect Europe, at least the United States. The idea is to consolidate a market that offers opportunities. So when you see the association of the Southeast Asian nations, ASEAN members, coming to the BRICS, and you look at, of course, Indonesia, you get Malaysia, you get Vietnam, Thailand. These are people that are looking at the BRICS as an opportunity, and that's what it's all about. It's about being a part of a group that offers opportunities, fairness, equity, and that is also, I think, marking a very important milestone for the Bretton Woods financial system. It is saying that it is no longer adapted. And if you listen to what Antonio Guterres had to say during the BRICS elocution, he was very clear that the financial system is not any longer adapted to developing economies. And people are fed up with the bullying from whether Europe or from the United States, especially in Africa and certain part of Asia. So I think there is a demand, and where there is a demand, you will find economies, you will find an approach with a rather political of detente, if you will, with the old Samuel Pizarro, kind of doctrines where it goes much faster than diplomacy, if you will. Business has a way to find its way, its route, and building itself and building these bridges amongst partners, countries, and so on. And I think that's what they're trying to promulgate for the BRICS, is really this allowing allowing developing countries to take advantage of an infrastructure that has a financial systems that allow them to be away from the Bretton Woods system and the hegemony that goes with it. So it's natural that it happens. All systems, and if you look at all the agenda, whether it's in Davos and everything, it's really about reinventing a system or destroying the old one to replace it with a new one. And that's exactly the big picture, is the replacement of the financial systems, economic systems, and who's going to take advantage of that, and who are going to be the players of this new system. And it's quite clear that the Global South wants to position itself and take full advantage of these opportunities. And of course, I agree 100% with Simon as far as the key moments of the BRICS being India and China, decided after 5 years to come to the table during this particular event and decide to put an end to that, because stability is very important. It's very conducive for business. That's the reason why you see West Asia, Eurasia being completely destabilized, because some people are acting deliberately to destabilize and to maintain these countries destabilized so that this bloc cannot unify. And that's the problem that we have. Security issues and economic issues are linked. If you cannot, provide security and stability, you're not going to have, doesn't matter how much money you're going to put into it, you'll never be able to develop the full potential of your economic potential for each country. So that's what we want to see. We want to see Eurasia, you want to see West Asia, thriving and being able to create new routes, new economic corridors, and coming up with also great support and trading support with Africa, that is in desperate need of expressing itself on the international map, not being exploited, but being a partner to the world, because Africa can feed the world, and Africa has such a young population, and you know how much Africa means to me. I've spent so many years in Africa and in the Middle East, so I understand and can clearly see that many Middle Eastern countries have understood the importance of Africa. Even in Dubai, which spent many years there, could clearly see that there is a flow, a hub that is naturally created to facilitate this trade from West Asia to the Middle East and then to Africa. So this is going to be a very interesting time, as far as seeing countries coming out of poverties, and hopefully technology and many other assets can be implemented from the get-go, so that these countries can jump into the 21st century and be able to, on a fair ground, to utilize their natural resources. Africa is extremely rich, but this is not a place where countries are and should be allowed any longer to come to exploit not only the resources, but the people as well, because it comes together as well. So this is the promise of a better world, and that's what, it's not hard to sell in a world that is really is going down. If you're in Europe, I came back in Europe 5 years ago. I'm looking at my country and I'm like, where the hell am I? I mean, this is just, it's not doing great. It's not doing great at all. And we're up for some very difficult time. So the hope is somewhere else, and it's created in another part of the world. And that's the, natural course of things.
Yeah, you got to have the sales pitch for the future, and the West does not have it. The West is offering World War III, basically. Maintain our position at the top, knock everybody else down, disrupt, sabotage. This is all you hear in the United States 24/7 on the media. China is going to overtake us, and Putin is trying to, blackmail Europe with energy and so forth. I mean, that's the compelling future narrative that Western politicians. So I think of this. I'll go to Simon as well on some of these points, but to me, it's and I've said this previously in interviews and things. The West has a lack of imagination as to what is the story going forward. What is going to be their place in the world? What are they going to bring to the world? The United States in particular. Is it going to rise together with everybody, or is it going to disrupt and knock down any peer competitors, as John Mearsheimer would say? Thucydides trap? Is this what the death grip which the West is stuck in? That's the big question. You mentioned Glenn Deason, the Norwegian geopolitical analyst, Simon, earlier, and I got a chance to attend a talk that Glenn gave in Rome last week, and he talked a lot about the relationship between the Eurasian Union. Obviously, this is with BRICS in the background, the Eurasian Union, the Belt and Road Initiative, and then the Shanghai Cooperation Association, and how these three institutions, or two institutions in the Belt and Road Initiative, how they can be harmonized, and how all of these things kind of work together to harmonize, as well as the BRICS Development Bank that's going to be in the mix there. In the same way, in the West, you have the World Bank, you have the IMF, you have some of these global, the G20, the G7, and so forth. That they're meant to kind of harmonize multilateralism, but failing badly because of really the interests, I think, of the United States, is kind of running contrary to a lot of what the rest of the world wants, and they're trying to basically force their agenda through. But what do you think about this, the relationship between the Eurasian Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road Initiative? Are the leading countries in BRICS going to be able to harmonize these things so that they're functioning? Because I know you spoke about a constitution and having a charter and so forth, but I can see why they're going slow, Simon, because you don't want to get this one wrong. And that's because if it goes horribly wrong in terms of, like, if you create a parallel financial structure and it's not fully baked, it could end in tears. So I can see the conservative approach that some of these more powerful countries are taking in BRICS. What are your thoughts on how all these institutions and initiatives and so forth are coming together?
So this has already been described in detail by President Putin on the 14th of June in the speech that he gave to all the Russian diplomats. And it was then repeated on the 21st by Sergei Lavrov. And to explain the Greater Eurasian Partnership, which is Putin's vision, which is being formed in cooperation with Xi, they regard that as a integration of associations. I've called it a confederation of associations. So they're not just talking about SCO, with which there's a large overlap with BRICS, the outlier being Pakistan, that obviously India doesn't want to come into BRICS at the moment. But it also is intended to include the African Union and the Arab League. It's a huge, huge scheme. Now, China's doing its part to incorporate the African Union, as we saw with the FOCAC summit, and that was the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, at which almost every single leader of Africa attended and was personally greeted in their own limo in Beijing, in the Hall of the People, by President Xi, one by one. And they compared that to when they had the Africa Summit in Washington, D.C. And they were all, as one leader put it, put onto a school bus and driven to the White House. So this goes to show you how China is exercising its soft power in exactly the same way that you explained, that their pitch for what Xi calls a shared future, a shared prosperous and harmonious future for mankind, as opposed to World War III. That is essentially the choice that's being offered at the moment. And whilst many countries are reluctant to sign directly onto Putin's Greater Eurasian Partnership, the cornerstone of which, as acknowledged by Lavrov, is the Eurasian Economic Union. We, for example, have seen, despite Putin doing a state visit and trying to be as persuasive as possible, Uzbekistan has declined to join the Eurasian Economic Union. And they've actually formally said they've studied 1,000 documents related to it, and they respectfully decline. Kazakhstan has refused to put in a full membership application for BRICS. And in response, Russia announced a whole load of grain issues that they banned Kazakhstan exports into Russia because of rot and quality control issues that many interpreted as a direct response to the refusal from Tokayev to put in the full membership application. But we've got Turkey via the Organization of Turkic States is also trying to create a federation. Indeed, their goal for 2045 is to unify completely all of the Turkish-speaking states into a union state, like the relationship between Belarusia and Russia. So the geopolitical blocks that are shifting are really, really incredible. And Xi said this in his address to the BRICS Plus Summit, which was the separate name on Thursday, when the observer nations fully participated, having been promoted to this newly created partnership status. And he said that we're seeing a momentous cooperation for modernization of the entire global South, in addition to the integration occurring within BRICS. And he explained that this was one of the greatest changes in human civilization. And that's a direct quote.
No, that is interesting. I mean, looking at the Turkey thing is the Turkey side of that is interesting. I mean, already I want to talk. There's a rift also that came up in Kazan between Brazil and Venezuela. I want to talk about that in a moment. But it just does seem to me like a lot of the activity, a lot of the power, a lot of the congealing naturally is going on the Eurasian continent, and then Africa and South America, especially South America, is much more distant because they fall within the United States Western Hemisphere zone and U.S. influence hemisphere as well. So that's arguably one of the causes of this rift between Brazil and Venezuela. But before I talk about that, so Iran has made a full application to BRICS. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is this correct, Simon? Iran is now on track to be a fully fledged member of BRICS?
Well, they're already a fully fledged member of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they do want to be a fully fledged member of BRICS as well, because with the new payment system, and just to explain that, SWIFT, the Society for Worldwide International Funds Transfers, is only about 50 years old, and it was started originally by 14 banks, and it's now the payment system for 11,000 banks. So with the changes that we have in technology, an alternative system could be created much, much faster than the gradual development of SWIFT to essentially become a monopoly. And that is what is enabling the EU and the United States to impose both primary and secondary sanctions on many, many countries. So even if they're dealing in their local currencies, as opposed to a commodity-backed currency, which seems to me far more likely than a gold-backed alternative in the BRICS system. And they're even talking about that for cross-border payments, not necessarily a euro-type single currency for all of those countries. Because when you look at some of them that have even been put in as full members, then places like Ethiopia and Egypt have got a great number of financial problems, particularly with the current Red Sea blockade. And they were trying to put in Argentina. They invited them to become a full member, but then obviously Milei won the second round of the presidential election there and declined the invitation. But Argentina has been a complete economic basket case for many, many years as well. So, I mean, one of the things that I would just like to point out in terms of important paragraphs in the declaration. And I agree with Freddie that you have to watch the press briefings that were given after the meetings. You have to look at the presidential addresses to the assaulted people. But in terms of like a policy document, it is the communique or the summit declaration. And that's what, we have. And that explains how they're going to take these projects forward. You might describe it like the Soviet or the Chinese 5-year plan. And they do have 5-year plans, and they have 25-year plans as well. This is a really, really long-term project. And, Western politicians looking to their next election find it, particularly in America, where we have elections every 2 years for the House of Representatives, very hard to get their heads around with the scope of this kind of like, multi-generational scheme. And I mean, just two things. Multilateralism. The Chinese premier, not the president, but the premier, Li Qiang, when he recently went to the Munich Security Conference in Germany, he explained this concept, and he said multilateralism is insufficient, because what that has become is the hegemon, as the Chinese say, by which they mean the United States of America, gives orders to its NATO vassals, and they then, in most instances, vote or abstain as directed. But they then say that it's got the support of 30 countries, but the orders are coming down the channel, right? So they're using the phrase now, true multilateralism, where independent nations have one equal weight vote each. But the other thing that's not really been commented on at all within the reviews of the document is you've got a repetition of the Arab Peace Initiative from 2002 that is completely included within the Kazan Declaration, but also in terms of environmental policy, and Freddie will be familiar with this phrase, no doubt, there's a massive pushback against CBAM, which stands for the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. And all of the BRICS countries, including the observer nations, the partners, are dead set against the operation of CBAM, and that rolls out in the European Union in January next year. And the purpose of that is to destroy competitive advantage based upon the cost of raw materials as Africa tries to do vertical integration of their economies, and also tries to destroy the value of the lower cost of labor by saying instead that things have to be not priced per se at this point, though I suspect that's coming next, but valued in terms of their environmental impact, such that if goods have been made cheaper in, for example, Indonesia or Vietnam, but the electricity that was used to manufacture them was generated from coal-fired power stations, as is the case still with a lot of generation in China, then tariffs are going to be placed on those goods based upon the European perception of their environmental impact. And it sounds crazy, but if people just look up European Union CBAM, there's huge policy documents about it, and it's just about to start. And when Freddie talks about unjustified inflation in France, this is going to be astronomically inflationary, because the cheap imports that have been coming from the BRICS/non-aligned/G77 countries, the European bureaucrats suddenly want to massively increase the price on those on the basis, supposedly, that they're not environmentally friendly, but in reality, to replicate the common agriculture policy that provides protectionism for European farmers, to instead provide carbon protectionism for all manufacturing industry for the whole of the European Union. And all that can do is raise average prices.
So this is just one of those things that is going to further plunge Europe into the dark ages, okay? And this is the worst possible part of the green agenda. And the thing about this is, Freddie and Simon as well, Freddie, you get your comment on this. If there is a difference, actually, but one of the big differences between Trump and Harris, or Republicans and Democrats, or this particular Republican, Donald Trump, the last time he came into power, immediately cut funding to the WHO. That was like 400 billion gone, withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords, out, stopped supporting the WEF in Davos, okay? And all of these sort of mechanisms that are going to, if Trump believes they're going to penalize American trade, manufacturing, or even buying goods from China and creating inflation in America, he's going to want to opt out. So the U.S. can opt out of all, and they do opt out as and when it suits them. Europe can't opt out of any of this stuff. They're so glued together on all of these crazy policies, Freddie. It's like Europe's on a death spiral, down to like a race to the bottom. They can't decouple from any of these globalist policies or institutions. Your thoughts on this, Freddie?
Yes, I think it's a very good point. I mean, you have to look at the beginning and how this program was set up. But we need to take away on this is to understand that it has to be compatible with the WTO, and that's what CBAM is linked into. Is linked into the WTO to provide that compatibility. On the other side of it, as I said, it's going to be you have to look at all the major product that's going to be and the goods which are in consideration with high risk of carbon leakage and so on. So you get all the iron, the steel industry, the cement, the fertilizing industry, the aluminium, electricity generations, and so on. So it's really across the board. So yeah, it's going to affect again, us, the taxpayers, for at least because it's a program that goes way above 2023-25 periods, and it's a system again. It's the creation of a system which will be enforced, to report obligation on the emissions embedded in relevant imports, and that's going to penalize a lot of people, and there's going to be a lot of controversy around that. I think Simon is bringing a great point on how this is going to, get back to continents and, like Africa and Asia, and how this fits in, and, who's going to come on top of that, and how to go around this. It's when I was reading about this, it's really amazed me, because I wrote a lot about the One Health principle, where you link environment, public health, food safety, and looking at these agencies working together and the principles and how they prepare these initiatives, and I found a lot of similarity and a lot of jargon in the CBAM that are close to the One Health. So it is a global agenda. It is a Davos agenda. There's no doubt about it.
So Africans are going to look at this like it's another form of neocolonialism, but just done through technocracies, European, Western based. And this is why, for the African countries, some of the major climate accords have collapsed in the past, is because Europe just believes that Africa needs to shoulder the burden for that. Not necessarily. They first tried to stick them with the cost, and then the Africans rejected that in 2009 in Copenhagen, and that whole thing collapsed. But now they want to make the Africans pay by saying to them, look, you can't develop, you can't have coal or what they call fossil fuels because of the planet, because of climate change. We've done it, and it's a mortal sin for Western civilization. We've polluted the planet. We've caused global warming. We're atoning for our sins now with all these great green mechanisms and carbon boondoggle projects. And so, you as Africans, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, you just you're too far back in the queue of humanity. You're just gonna have to stay in the Stone Ages, basically, and just. You're not going to be able to get the base load required to have a modern European Western style city. I'm sorry, but that's just the way the hand has been dealt to you, unfortunately. Africans see that more and more as neocolonialism. And there's a lot of African leaders now that do not want aid. They want trade, not aid. And China is talking their language. And I think BRICS is talking their language. They don't want to be tied into IMF restructuring debt, restructuring projects, austerity measures in exchange for like a couple of $1 billion, and then having to pay that off in compounding interest and be at the mercy of the dollar interest rate fluctuations and whatnot in the IMF basket. BRICS is offering something totally different with a lot more, I think, leeway, a lot more potential, long-term growth, you could say. And already the Francophone countries have, falling one by one in Central Africa. So a lot of changes have happened in the last couple of years, Freddie. So all we need now is, a country like Sudan or countries like Ethiopia to attain some stability so that they can be in a position to benefit from some of these changes. And just quickly, your thoughts on Sudan, Ethiopia, South Africa, Freddie. And I want to go to Brazil and Venezuela and get you and Simon's take on this controversy that sprung up at BRICS. But Freddie, your thoughts on Africa?
Well, Africa is complex because it's very difficult to make an assessment about Africa. Just talking at Africa as a whole, it's really demographic, it is really geographical, and depending on where in Africa you talk about, you can make some kind of a precise assessment. South Africa is a great example of that, and I live there, so I'm married to a South African person, so I know a little bit more about South Africa. But you can't compare South Africa and Egypt. You cannot compare South Africa and Ethiopia. There's a different way of approaching. I think there are great dimensions that are definitely taken into consideration, but it's also historical. It's also the existing economic ties, between China and South Africa. There's a lot of ties there, and then of course all the eastern countries of Africa are absolutely strategic along the Red Sea. These are really some of the areas that are absolutely crucial for the control of the trade. So, as I said, these are more geoeconomic and geopolitics, but geoeconomic decisions that's going to make Africa relevant. My concern is that how many of the Western African countries are going to be considered by that. We see, of course, with Traoré and Burkina Faso and all these countries setting up themselves. But Africa is a big country, and there's going to be many other countries that need to be brought in. We cannot just take of those that have significance from an economic point of view or from a geopolitical point of view. As I said, it really needs to be fair as far as the attention the countries are receiving. And I'm a little bit concerned about that because I can clearly see that the geoeconomics and politics are really at play there. And I'm worried that some countries that have less to offer might be left behind as well. So that's something I'm looking forward to see how the BRICS is going to address that from a geographically and geoeconomic point of view. And then from that assess, is whether Africa is going to have some more regional policies from an economic point of view, where a certain part of the southern part of Africa is going to create, which they already exist, but this kind of bilateral agreements and more regional agreements that facilitate the trades, look at how to reduce the taxes and so on. So whatever existed has been put in place mainly by Western Europe influence organizations, and but these actually work within the BRICS. And if the BRICS is to enlarge its presence in Africa, how that is going to work. So that's where we're looking at. We're looking for markers, to understand where this is going. Right now, I don't have a clear picture about Africa really as to how this is going to work. It's definitely in the place, but I'm not in the diplomatic circles anymore, so I don't have preview to strategy, unfortunately.
Well, hopefully the Africa's in a position to negotiate, to court. If they break for the East, if they break for Asia, Europe could lose Africa, and I fully see that as a possibility in the future. If the West can't come back to some of these African countries with a better vision of the future, a better deal that's going to work for them as well, they're going to head east. That's just going to be a fact of life. But you guys probably saw this major rift that broke out in Kazan. Apparently, Brazil vetoed Venezuela's application in there. That was the first part of the initial process. And Lulu magically couldn't make it. Get slipped and fell or something like that, bumped his head or something. Couldn't make it, cancels, and then this happens at Kazan. I don't think that was any coincidence. So this is interesting because Lulu's meant to be a left-wing government. So apparently there's no more love lost anymore with Venezuela. It seems like Brazil is parroting Washington's regime change rhetoric about the last Venezuelan elections being fraudulent. And so that's interesting. It's also at odds with what so Elon Musk supposedly was going to battle with Brazil about X being available to the Brazilian market. But then Elon Musk was also calling for regime change in Venezuela as well. So it seems like Lulu and Elon are on the same page when it comes to regime change in Venezuela. I find this to be absolutely crazy, not least of all because Venezuela is definitely on the cusp of regaining some of its lost footing. They've got inflation under control, incredible. It's very resilient administration. It's gone through a lot of hardship, sanctions, and so forth. Their national petroleum industry has taken a beating. The United States stole it, practically, Citgo, and handed some of it to Juan Guaido in Washington. I mean, what a circus. And then, so as a founding member of BRICS, Brazil has done the unthinkable here, Simon. What do you make of this? Because first of all, this puts Lulu's left-wing credentials into the tank. And now you're looking, I'm calling this car wash part 2. United States, the revenge of the U.S., the empire strikes back. What do you think about this, Simon?
I find it less surprising, frankly, because there's a big issue with Guyana. And Brazil, as well as Argentina, have been supporting Guyana, formerly British Guyana, independence, whereas Venezuela and the Maduro regime are essentially claiming half the country. So, and most of their $1 trillion oil reserves offshore. So they're not happy to see that kind of concentration, and neither are the Chinese and American investors in Guyanese offshore oil. So that's something that, frankly, the commentators haven't really talked about at all in terms of that situation. But, we've had Guyana on the UN Security Council, and for a country of approximately 1 million people, they've been massively punching above their weight in diplomatic circles. So one wonders what influence, even from the bottom rather than the top, there may have been to delay Venezuela going into that. They still do have massive economic problems, and the elections, like those in Georgia and like those in Moldova, are very, very heavily disputed. So I appreciate that people like Putin have been, and China have been very one-sided indeed in recognizing the Venezuelan re-election of President Maduro. But it's not just the West that's raised issues. In terms of the economic impact upon Venezuela of sanctions, one shouldn't forget that the British Supreme Court stole the gold of Venezuela that at the time was valued at over $20 billion and told them not to return its control to the Maduro regime. So, I mean, they weren't able to transfer the use of it completely to Guaido because, his alleged presidency obviously collapsed and came to nothing. One of America's, forlorn attempts at an orange revolution. And so in terms of the kind of environmental protectionism, I do think that it's important to note in the Kazan Declaration, there are many, many references, not only to the Paris Climate Accord, but also to Agenda 2030, which remember happened the same year, 2015. Both of those occurred in 2015, right? So there's multiple references to achieving Agenda 2030 in the Kazan Declaration. And there's a lot of references to both the general concept of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also specific numbers of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the issues of that was that the implementation of the decarbonization of the global economy is in phases that give China and India decades extra of time to achieve those. But as we're seeing with the implementation of alternative energy, both be it solar, wind, and EVs, there are more EVs now in China than the rest of the world put together, right? But Xi's been very, very clear, unlike the British, who have been blowing up their coal-fired power.
Yeah, hold on. We're gonna bring Simon back. His line's gone a bit funny. Freddie, do you want to riff off anything that Simon's brought up there? Yeah, Freddie, I think you got your mic muted. Freddie, you want to unmute your mic?
Oh, there you go.
Sorry.
That's better. Yeah, no, Simon's done a pretty good roundtable here, covering up the way it should be covered. So well done for that. And I think personally, Lula is a very strange character, and there's a lot of contradictions in between what he do and what he says, and can clearly see as well for the BRICS. I didn't attend, I think, if I remember well, and I hurt his head probably, on the cupboard, and couldn't make it. But he's full of contradictions. He actually supported the idea of Venezuela being part of BRICS at the beginning. He did, and so then he was reminded that everybody has a boss, and he certainly has bosses as well. And it's very interesting to see how what he's asking basically Maduro is to provide the result of the election. That's what he's asking him basically in a nutshell, to present and show me that you're for real, that you're legit. There's a problem of legitimacy there that doesn't sit well with Lula, but we could ask the same question about Lula and his legitimacy.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I'll tell you right now, the United States backed Bolsonaro, and the U.S. deep state intelligence services helped to put Lula and Dilma, all that stuff, get them locked up, out of the race. Okay, the money wasn't a Soros-funded operation. It was done through the Koch brothers, and that included all the Senate races and all the free market privatization revolution that Bolsonaro came in with a mandate, not just him, but all of those other offices. Okay, that was from the U.S. Okay, they did the young leaders training in the run up to that. They bankrolled the rallies, all of that. And then for some reason, the United States changed tact after 4 years. And when Lula came back in, immediately, WHO, vaccine mandates, he opted back into all of the globalist stuff that Bolsonaro was trying to opt out of, and being, characterized as Brazil's Trump. Okay, so that just goes to show you that Washington might back one horse, and as soon as they're done with that horse, they'll switch to another horse, and they'll decommission the horse they just backed. They do this a lot, and they could very well do the same thing in Ukraine at some point when the time is right and most advantageous. They could very well change course and direction there. This is what the U.S. do. So it's not a monolithic deep state in that sense. They're very opportunistic and into medium range and short-term planning as well. Look, we have we got, I just want to check, Simon, do we got you back on the audio? See, Simon, if you're muted or not, I'm not sure. We lost the audio for Simon. What we might do is if you kind of log in, log out of the system, we'll see if we can bring you back up. But yeah, just come out of the studio and come back in. So we got a couple minutes left. We're gonna wrap this up, Freddie. Simon, Hesher as well. Hesher had to step away. Is nursing an injury this week, so it must be a football injury. So Freddie, we're not going to talk about. Hold on, let me see. I get Simon coming back here. Yeah, Freddie, there's a lot of things we haven't talked much about, which I guess we'll push over. I think this has been a really good discussion for our BRICS space on X on Tuesday night, and we're probably going to have a good cryptocurrency representative there from the Bitcoin community. Simon Dixon will join us. Blake Lovewell as well from 21st Century Wire. Hope to see you there, Freddie, to chime in. And Simon, of course, you're welcome, and Hesher as well. Arno Devilay is going to be joining us, and I think someone else from Russia who was in Kazan is going to be coming on board as well. So we're going to have a good panel there. This was a good, I think, pre-discussion to get us kind of identify some of the important issues here. I've taken some notes. We're going to carry those over to the space on Tuesday. So keep an eye at 21 Wire for that space. I think we'll even get Iara Madarelli. She's going to join us as well. She's a journalist based in Spain. She's been covering some of these issues as well. So we've got that to look forward to. I want to go around the room. Final thoughts. Simon, give us your 2-minute elevator pitch about what we should be paying attention to in the next couple of weeks.
Well, I think we're going to have to see the fallout from Georgia and Japan. Japan's very important in terms of Asian NATO. The Liberal Democratic Party were actually pushing that quite hard after their leadership election. And like Macron and like Rishi Sunak, the calling of the early general election appears to have been an electoral disaster for them. I would invite people to go to the website that I have with Sam Cheney at weaponizenews.com. We put out a lot of 1 and 2 hour documentaries that really go into the text of some of these documents in frankly excruciating details. So this is a wonderful kind of like around the world discussion. I've been extremely grateful to participate in it, but sometimes the devil literally is in the details. So we try and do a daily program on X and Rumble and BitChute and YouTube and Facebook, but on Saturdays we tend to post a full-length documentary program on the details of a single subject, and a huge amount of research goes into those. And I appreciate that it's very hard when you're a working journalist to sit down and read a 12 or 25,000 word document. But when you do want to see into the future, assuming, of course, that you're not in the World Economic Forum and you're not doing forecasting where they scan the horizon for, quote, a message from the future, then sometimes getting into the policy documents is particularly important. And look at Britain, for example. They're about to enter the new Labour government, a 100-year alliance that was previously announced by Rishi Sunak and Grant Shapps, the British former defence minister.
Okay, we'll get Simon to come back. We're going to drop him down. You left me in absolute peril there with anticipating what he was about to say. His audio dropped. Freddie, your final thoughts on that? Feel free to riff off anything Simon said.
Yeah, I mean, we all focus on the greater Israel plan. There's no doubt about it. I think this is an area of great interest. See how this conflict is going to evolve, and the increasing role of the United States and Antony Blinken in starving the poor Palestinian in Gaza. So that's definitely always on top of my mind, because there's some great information that people can gather on this topic. They can go to Drop Site News. Great article there to understand a little bit more about Blinken's behind the curtain activities, where we learn and how he participated actively in the process of basically starving the Palestinian people, and with his pal Netanyahu really basically putting together a plan that will hinder most of the aid entrance, whether it's food or medicine, into the Gaza Strip, while basically giving a lot of press conference and a lot of statement how he's going to be supporting the idea of increasing the aid in the Gaza Strip. So we're really dealing with psychopaths here, people that have no problem telling you the opposite of what they're doing. But the truth is out. It's came out. It's great reports, and I really invite people to look at the this article. I think the title of the article is Blinken approved policy to bomb aid trucks, Israeli cabinet members suggest. Fantastic. It's really worth the read. Apart from that, we'll obviously get more takeaway from the BRICS, trying to really understand exactly what Vladimir Putin was trying to tell to the West when he was presented with a mock-up, a pseudo-BRICS note at the summit. I think it's a very important messaging there, trying to make people understand that they mean business and they mean currency. Yes, that's pretty much what I'm focusing on at the moment. And as you know, I'm wrapped up in an investigation, which hopefully will be out soon. And that takes most of my time, so I'm a little bit away from the, all the analysis that I normally do. But I will be back soon, and definitely try to join you guys on Tuesday. And thank you for having me, Patrick.
No, it's our pleasure. And that we didn't talk much about Israel's strike against Iran. I thought when I saw Israel's launched salvos against Iran, I thought, well, this could be the big one, because they had that leak. You guys noticed that leak out of the United States a couple of days ago about Israel's nuclear weapons. And Freddie can testify. What the first thing we said when we saw that is, what the hell is this about? Somebody is bluffing. Somebody's playing. This is a game ahead of the Israeli strike to create some kind of public perception. And I was expecting some serious fireworks, and it turned out to be a big Van Jones, a big nothing burger. Nothing happened. Apparently Iran set up, I don't know if you guys saw this, set up some decoy targets, fake nuclear research facility or something like this, and fed Israel intel about it, and they fired at it. Iran's kind of a big country, guys. It's not half of New Jersey like Israel. So what can Iran do in retaliation? If they choose to, whenever they want, and I don't care about the THAAD missile system that the United States has sent, which has how many in the chamber? 10 in the chamber. Then to reload, what happens if Iran sends a couple hundred more missiles at that one target? They're going to flatten some Israeli base. So Israel had to do this to get a good look in before the U.S. election. I think it'd be wise for Iran not to respond for the moment, and maybe wait for a period in the future. But not impressed. I thought it was going to be shock and awe by Israel. David slaying, everything going on there. Nothing didn't happen. Were you as underwhelmed as I was, Hesher, about this Israeli attack on Iran?
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't help but notice that Trump went out and used it for the Trump stump also, talked about what a terrible thing it was that this intel got leaked, so he rode that wave a little bit too. Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. And I mean, how many power and logistics stations are there in Israel? I mean, it can't be that many in a space that small. So I would imagine they should be a little bit more concerned about infrastructure and military strikes than Iran should be. It's I don't know. It just seems like it's a lot of optics. It feels like it's a lot of optics and narrative, and again, not much substance or nuance. And of course, the mass media cartel's not doing their part. Well, I guess they are doing their part in obfuscating everything and flipping the narratives in ridiculous directions.
So, like, just quickly, Freddie and I were talking about this when the leak came out, and I didn't know what I thought. Well, let's wait and see. Let's see what we'll see. We're going to know more either by the time there's this counterattack by Israel, response, or whatever you want to call it, or the U.S. elections. At some point, we're going to find out what this really means. These leaks, right? So could have been somebody in the United States wanted to kind of check Israel a little bit, saying, hey, we're going to publicize a few things about your capabilities, which Israel likes to keep completely black boxed. Okay. But there's another thing. No one's ever seen Israel's nuclear deterrent. We just assume they have it. Okay. Is it possible, and I put this out as a major conspiracy theory, is it possible that Israel has been bluffing? Maybe they had or have had at one point a nuclear deterrent, but it's expensive to maintain a nuclear deterrent. And we were talking about this, the amount of manpower needed just for the nukes. You're talking about a few thousand full-time specialists just to maintain and look after. Then you have to recommission, decommission, recommission, replace. You've got waste storage. There's a whole bureaucratic infrastructure if you have nukes. And I just don't see it in Israel, along with all the other stuff that they're juggling. I really don't see them earmarking, what would be the cost of that per year? 10 to 20 billion or something like that. I don't see it. So I'm saying far-flung conspiracy theory. Israel's nuclear deterrence has lapsed. They've been bluffing. And that leak was to reinforce the idea that they're, Samson option, ready to rock and roll, take the whole world down if they're threatened. That's a possibility. And I know it's far-flung, but we live in a crazy world. Any thought? Is Simon with us? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, go on, Simon.
Simon,
Yes,
you with
I am.
us?
Thank you. There's two things going on there. One, I do think that the Israelis still have that in the bag. Obviously they were given the seeding materials by Churchill going back a long time. They can recreate the materials they need from their Dimona reactor. And part of the leak may indeed not just have been about getting the target package amended, as the Biden administration was extremely keen to do. But you may also be seeing what I call the Ali Shamkhani scenario. And remember, he was the Iranian national security advisor who, with Chinese assistance, negotiated the détente with Saudi Arabia that was signed on the 10th of March 2023. He ended up stepping down because his deputy was accused of treason. And that's what we're seeing now with the deputy of Gordon Phillips, who was likely either to be the Secretary of Defense or the National Security Advisor under a Harris administration. So I think there's quite a few things at play currently. And if you should choose to invite me back to discuss the Middle East, I'd be very, very happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. This is a live open file, actually, this particular story. I think there's a lot more that we can talk and can be said about that. Hesher, Freddie, you guys got any comments on this before we wrap it up?
Hey, thanks for having me, and it's great to see you back, Pat. Thanks for being here and hosting today. And check us out in the boiler room. We got our latest episodes. We're sort of backfilling posts on the website right now. So this last Thursday, we had the triumphant return of Randy J in the boiler room. That was fantastic. We talked about zombie pig brains and weather modification, all kind of stuff. So we had a good time on Thursday. We were looking at this story about British advisors to Kamala Harris hoping to kill Elon Musk's Twitter. So that's all interesting, seeing the censorship push sort of go international like that and partisan. So we had a good time in the boiler room. Join us every Thursday for boiler rooms. Check the website, alternatecurrentradio.com. And thanks for the invite to Tuesday's space. I will be there with bells on, Pat.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, do some little bit of BRICS homework, guys. Come with some good questions and points to bring up. We got a really good, skilled group of people. We'll be able to figure some things out. Freddie, final thoughts. Go for it.
Yeah, just to rebound on what Simon was saying, and first of all, really enjoy Simon's talk today. I think he's got a lot of good points, good knowledge, and that's the journalism that has deserted our shores, unfortunately. But yes, I'd love to hear his take on certain of the Middle East events and current events and perhaps past events as well. It could be interesting to pick his brain on that, because he's extremely knowledgeable. So I'm grateful for that. And on the other side, yes, of course, we must stay in the real world. Understand that Iran has totally the capacity to understand what's going on in Israel, and it will be really ridiculous not to think that they are not fed with ISR intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance intelligence from Russian satellites. So, I mean, the whole idea and the whole concept behind these documents is not about informing anybody. I don't think there's any information is valuable, but it's a message, and it's come definitely with inside, and there are definitely some battles going on, Pentagon, White House, National Security Council. These are very tense moments in the United States, because the United States is at the crossroad, and I think everybody's playing their card now at the last minute, and that's probably a card that was played there. Anyway, I don't know much more about it, but that's the way I read it for now. I'm just going to leave everyone on this as a food for thought, and I'll thank you very much, and I've enjoyed this evening sharing some time with you guys.
Thank you, Freddie. Appreciate your analysis as well, and thank you to Hesher. Thank you to Simon as well. It's great to meet you, Simon, and hopefully we can have more conversations like this. Very much, I've enjoyed it very much, as have our listeners and our gaggle of readers and 21 Wire followers in our chat room at 21stcenturywire.com. Got a fantastic chat of multimedia chat facility there at the website. You can see us most every Sunday here for the Sunday Wire on this same platform here on X, on Rumble, on YouTube. We go out live. Facebook, I think so. We might have had a problem with the API. We'll get that fixed soon enough. But that's kind of all the platforms that we're broadcasting live on. We've done some really good interviews, 21 Wire Live midweek. We did a couple with Simona Mangiante Papadopoulos, reviewing the new series, All the President's Men, on Tucker Carlson Network, and also Sean Stone, the director. Oliver Stone's son, Sean, directed the 6-part series, which is on TCN Network, Tucker Carlson's network there. And I haven't watched all 6 yet, but I just got my access to Tucker's platform to watch that series. So I'm looking forward to seeing all the different series there, All the President's Men. So yeah, we're doing some really good midweek broadcasting too. We'll revamp the format of the Sunday Wire a little bit here. And of course, we're on the audio streams as usual. So for our loyal listeners and everybody that stuck with us during this very difficult time over the last 3 months, and I have not been here for part of that for personal reasons, and I appreciate all the notes of support from everybody. It's been very encouraging. Thank you very much, and thank you, big thank you to Hesher, Ruckus, and everybody that stepped in to fill in as a host for me. And so it's great to be back. Great program today. And again, we'll continue this conversation today we're having a BRICS space on X, which is Tuesday on Spaces. That'll be about 9 p.m. UK time, just somewhere around there, maybe 8 p.m. UK time, actually. So keep an eye on at 21Wire for updates on that. It's going to be a BRICS space. We'll have people from Kazan who were there at the event covering it and speaking at Kazan. We'll have them on our panel along with our other analysts. So we're going to big focus on the finance. Big focus on finance. We're also going to have somebody from the Middle East, financial expert as well, talk about Saudi Arabia, UAE, and some of these countries, the relationship with Iran, the future of BRICS in that sense as well. So we're going to have, pretty good collection of people there. So looking forward to that on X Tuesday. Be there. And again, thanks guys for a great program. We'll see you here for the Sunday Wire next week. Keep an eye on the streams midweek as well. 21Wire Live will go out probably for another segment. We'll have an interview on Wednesday or Thursday. So we're going to try to start spinning things up a little bit. So again, appreciate you guys. It's been amazing. This has been episode 520 of the Sunday Wire. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. We're going to sign out now, but to stay with us on all our various streams, 21stcenturywire.com. And by the way, look at this ticker at the bottom, winter fundraising drive coming up. We need your help. If you like what we do, please think about supporting us. Any donations, greatly appreciated, as well as subscriptions. Support us monthly at 21wire.tv. You guys have been following us for a while. We really need your support now more than ever. So please consider doing that as well. For now, it's me, and I'm signing out. Take care, you guys. All the best.
For in the final analysis, we all inhabit this small planet, and we are all mortal.
Lately I've been watching the world gone mad. Brothers and sisters full to take a stand, to hate their fellow man, another man. Divide and conquer is the acronym plan. Distract the people, control the story. Don't believe your lying eyes, you know me. Stay in power no matter what, playing with a doomsday clock. Turn a blind eye and gamble your trust, pushing us to turn to good. Corruption and lies, truth is the crime, will turn to gold. Well-designed misery to keep you on edge, make you believe anything anyone says. Keep it left or right, not top or bottom. Accuse the victim, can't you see we got 'em? Stay in power no matter what, playing with the doomsday clock. Turn a blind eye and gamble your trust, pushing us to turn to dust. We've captured rights, feudals our time will turn to dust. People as commodity, cheer on war and atrocity. No accountability, perpetual impurity.